Welcome back. It's time now for Touch Base in Seoul, where we introduce our listeners to some interesting or prominent figures here in Korea. Now, South Korea and Sweden may not sound like the most obvious of partners, but the two countries celebrate 60 years of official diplomatic relations this year. And so to tell us more about this relationship, we're delighted to have joining us in the studio Sweden's ambassador to South Korea, Jakob Hallgren. Ambassador Hallgren, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Now, I just want to get a little bit background on you personally first, because you came to Seoul last September. So you've been here about 6-7 months now. You've been a career diplomat your whole life in various countries. I understand mostly in Europe and the Balkans. But this was your first posting in Asia. What do you know about Korea before you came, and how has it been adjusting?
Yeah, it's correct that this is my first posting. However, I did work quite a lot with Asia, and I had a bit of a unusual posting for a diplomat, as I was just before I arrived, and since I served as the deputy director to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, and there we worked on research on peace and security, weapons of mass destruction, etc. And then we worked quite a lot on the Korean peninsula, which meant that I met quite a few Koreans from the south and from the north, actually.
And how's it been now actually coming to Korea and living here for the past few months?
I love it. It's a wonderful country. I like the dynamism. It's modern and nice people. And I would even argue that there's similarities in mentality between Nordic people and Korean people that I've come to really appreciate.
What kind of similarities would you say?
I think that there's, competition and collaboration, a certain sense of modesty in a way that I could recognize. And then, of course, the dynamism, fast movers, early adapters, and all of that I could see also in Sweden, innovation, etc. All of those things are, resonate with me as a Swede here when I come here.
As we started the show, diplomatic relations between South Korea and Sweden go back to 1959, but actually the real start of the relations was, in the modern era anyway, was a few years earlier in the Korean War. Sweden did not send military forces to Korea during the Korean War, but the Swedish Red Cross Field Hospital was the first medical unit to operate the year the Korean War began in 1950. Now, did you know about this history before coming to Korea, and how do you feel when you learnt about it?
I did know about it, and I must say that I'm incredibly proud of the commitment of my ancestors who decided in that summer of 1950 to heed the call from the United Nations to send a field hospital. And it was indeed the first medical unit that arrived. Already, the war started on the 25th of June, and that Swedish field hospital arrived already on the 23rd of September, 150 doctors and nurses, etc. And they stayed for many years. And so that's quite fantastic. It has created a very strong human bond, and which has continued from that time.
Do you feel when you talk to Korean people, especially people who might know this history, that connection as well?
I think so. Certainly in the elder generation. And now 2 weeks ago, it was actually the day when the diplomatic relations were established on the 11th of March. And then we premiered a documentary done by Swedes with elderly Swedes and elderly Koreans who had served or been patients at that field hospital, and that's a story which is really worth studying and worth retelling, because it's a tale of humanity which also kind of speaks to us wider than the Sweden-Korean relation, I would say.
So that started off in a very that important historical time, like the Korean War, but it's developed since then. How would you say the relationship between South Korea and Sweden has changed since then?
Obviously, we all know that Korea has seen a spectacular development, both economically and in terms of the democracy. It's become a democracy, and with civil society and everything. So I would really brand this relation as stronger and stronger over the years. It's been, we're really two equal partners now. At the time of, it's obvious that Korea needed help, but now we're so impressed with all of Korea's achievements, and I'd say that there's a lot of curiosity in Sweden about many Korea phenomena these days.
Mm. When you say Korea4, I mean, there's a lot now that South Korea and Sweden can give and take, especially in trade-wise. I mean, how has that developed? There's obviously a lot of exchange between cars and tech and machinery, but how is that developing?
I mean, it's true that both Korea and Sweden are preeminent manufacturing countries. I mean, shipbuilding, cars, phones, and ICT, etc. But what I like, and which is really striking, is how the softer parts of our respective kind of product ranges, whether it is fashion or music or food and lifestyle, is really, that's trending in Sweden these days. So as I've told before, I've said before, kind of hipsters on the southern side of Stockholm, they're preparing their own kimchi. I couldn't believe it. 10 years ago, I had never heard about it, and they used to do sourdough bread, but now it's kimchi. Yeah? and equally with fashion and K-pop and the whole kind of cultural wave. But I also think that some of the kind of Swedish design and music, etc., that resonates here. So that's a curiosity which is there, and where I think that there is a huge, still untapped potential, actually. Huh?
I understand your children also knew about K-pop as well.
Yeah.
They're quite perhaps fans, would you say? Or?
Yeah. Well, both my own kids and friends' kids, and I just have to realize that they know about things that I haven't been really able to follow track on. But that's really great.
As you mentioned, this is the 60th anniversary of Sweden-Korea ties, and there's a series of programs to commemorate this occasion. Can you tell us a bit more about these programs?
No, yeah, with pleasure. So, first of all, we have a wonderful collaboration with the Korean embassy in Stockholm. So already in the fall, we launched a joint contest or competition. So and that result regarding a logo for the anniversary. So we agreed on a logo that is used by the Korean embassy in Sweden and by us here, which is like a 60th sign with a smile. And then every month we're organizing a seminar. We call it the Sweden Talk Seminar, where we will invite a Korean and a Swede to talk about some issue that binds us together, or where there is preeminent expressions in both countries. So in January we did innovation, and then we've done startupping. Last week we did peace and security. Next month we're going to do gender and welfare, etc. And we're going to continue with that throughout the year. And then we have a big Sweden Day event early June that we've had for many years. In the fall we do a film festival, Swedish film festival in 4 cities. And then we're also hoping for some preeminent high-level visit, ideally in both directions, which will kind of focus the attention. So I think you will hear a lot about this bilateral relation throughout the year.
Preeminent high-level visits. How high up are we speaking?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. We're certainly trying to get ministerial level or something. We're working hard on that. Nothing is confirmed, but I think that there is a sympathy on both sides for this.
The Sweden also has a very unique position to offer South Korea, because Sweden has not only diplomatic relations with South Korea, but also with North Korea and the US as well. And by being that person, this neutral party in this situation with the Korean Peninsula, Sweden plays a particular role. How do you see that role that Sweden plays for the Korean Peninsula?
It is correct that we. Sweden is a small country far away, so we don't really have any strategic or geopolitical interests. But as a result of historical circumstance, we have a strong relation with South Korea, as we talked about. We happen to have been the first Western country to open diplomatic relations with North Korea in 1973. We have an embassy there since 1975, uninterrupted. We are protecting, or we are serving the United States for its consular and humanitarian affairs in the country, since they do not have an embassy. And we're also on the border, because Swedish officers have supervised the armistice on the DMZ. And all of that, are circumstances that no other country has. And since a couple of years ago, the Swedish government decided to appoint an envoy that would kind of work with all the parties and see whether Sweden, as an honest broker, as it were, could help out if, in case the parties would not be willing or able to talk to each other. So, and during some moments that has proven useful, and I think the most most concrete example of that was the meeting that you may have heard about happened in Stockholm in mid-January. With these countries, some of these countries present, including, of course, South Korea as well.
I mean, you've said in the past that because of this unique position Sweden plays. I mean, can you explain a little bit about how you feel Sweden could perhaps help in inter-Korean development and even the inter-Korean peace process?
Yeah, well, I think it's. I mean, I don't want to pretend that we could kind of solve this in any way. I mean, but I know I've been working with like peace processes and conflict management over the years, and sometimes at some occasions, if the parties would like to, there is actually a role for an outsider as a facilitator or as an honor broker, not really a mediator, but someone who could come in, who maybe has the trust with all of the parties, who could kind of help bring parties together. And but obviously this process and this conflict needs to be solved by the parties themselves. But as I said, sometimes an outside third party might come in handy, and that is a role that Sweden has played over the time. Sometimes it's needed, maybe sometimes not.
As you mentioned, the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang plays an important role in mediating somewhat between the US and North Korea. But is it true that in the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang there's a room set aside for Americans to act as possibly a liaison office if North Korea and the US ever do decide to have that kind of partnership? That
is correct. Yeah. No, so within the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang, there is actually a room set aside, which is there for the Americans to use the day they would like to open an interest section within the Swedish embassy, and this is something that was actually already decided when this agreement, where it was kind of decided that Sweden would protect the U.S. consular interest in 1995. So it's been there the whole time, but maybe it's only the last year or so that could conceivably be used. But that is, of course, a U.S. decision whether they would like to do that or not.
And we don't know any further details about this room. I mean, how big is it? How many people it can be? Or, is it just there with being used as a storeroom right now?
It's an office. It's an office room with it's an office. It's a room within the Swedish embassy. It stands there. It's ready. I know that my colleague, the Swedish ambassador Jonas Wendel to Pyongyang, he showed it to some Americans only last week who came by, some journalists, I believe. So it's there. It's ready. However, whether it would be big enough to accommodate the needs the day the U.S. would possibly consider opening an interest section is we don't know, but it's at least the first step in that case.
How does this relationship between Sweden and North Korea and the US, how does that affect you as an ambassador to South Korea? I mean, is this more of a media interest that you get, or do other perhaps government agencies or officials show interest in this as well?
Well, there is certainly an interest in that, as you say, from the media, and needless to say, this is mainly a matter for my colleague in Pyongyang and directly with United States interests, but I'm happy to talk about it, and this is part of the role that we would like to play, constructive, fostering peaceful outcomes, provided the parties are interested to and able and willing to go down that path.
Let's look ahead now. So to the future of South Korea and Swedish relations. How do you see that developing, and where do you want to see it go?
Well, I think we already today have a thriving and deep and broad and fantastically good relation, not least politically, and I'd like that to continue, because, as I said before, I think they'll still think that there is an untapped potential. I mean, there is a geographical distance, there is the time zone difference, but you know, in all of these areas that I mentioned, the new softer areas, there is a huge interest, and trade-wise, etc. So I think you know, there is much to discover for Koreans in Europe, in the Nordic countries, in Sweden, and likewise for Swedes here. So I'd like that to expand, whether it's trade, it's civil society, people to people, sports, you know, government to government. You know, there's a huge potential there, and I'm doing what I can to promote that in both countries, actually.
60 years of diplomatic relations, hopefully another 60 years to
at least.
At least. That's where we'll have to end it. Ambassador Jakob Hallgren, thank you for making the time to come to speak to us today.
Thank you very much.